Welcome to the Homegrown podcast. I'm your host, Liz Hazelmeyer, along with my husband, Joey.
Good afternoon.
And together we hope to educate, inspire, and equip you in your pursuit of true nourishment. Today's guest is Dr. Julie Dean Richards, known as the Crunchy Legal Lady. Julie is a law school graduate and has been a law clerk and legal researcher for one of the most successful law firms in the health freedom space. Julie actually was already on our show before. We had an awesome conversation around FDA approval of vaccines and free speech and the Constitution. And oh my gosh, if you haven't heard that episode, I will link it below. Please go listen. But Julie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm so excited. I love this. I feel like we need to schedule these periodic legal updates with you because you're so in the know. But I want to start today's conversation with a little bit more of a personal topic, discussing your recent hospital stay and how you were able to navigate interacting with the mainstream medical system and still understanding your legal rights, bodily autonomy, respecting and gaining respect of those doctors and nurses. So if you want to start with that story, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, for sure. So for those who don't know, my little 4-year-old, he's my middle child. I've got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And he appeared with this sudden, it looked like a goose egg on his neck. And it was red and it had red streaks coming out of it. So like red streaks coming one way, red streaks coming the other way. And, when I first saw it, I didn't freak out about it. It was hot to the touch. It hurt his neck. I marked it and I tried everything I could naturally before going into the doctor. My mom, of course, and many people in my family are healthcare practitioners, reached out to them, reached out to, people in the holistic space. What should I do about this? No one knew what it was. Tried all the natural antibacterials, antivirals, everything for about 3 days. And then we finally called it and said, okay, well, let's go in and see what the medical system can do for us. So we went to an urgent care and then immediately got hauled into the emergency room at a special children's hospital, which was very exciting. And if you're someone like us, this might be your worst nightmare. I mean, even if you are completely mainstream with your health practices, this is a parent's worst nightmare for sure. I remember the nurse telling us right away, you're going to be here for at least a week. You'll be here for a while. And I was a little surprised. They started testing everything and, swabs, bacterial, viruses, stuff like that. And his cheek had swelled up to look like a chipmunk on one side. So he's this lopsided chipmunk kid, so cute and so sad at the same time. And, I don't know, time in a hospital is like a vortex. It's you don't know what to do with yourself. And I'm hyper concerned, right? Because I'm a legal professional and because of my research background, I'm hyper concerned about what they're doing, what they're giving to my child, what's happening. And so you're kind of on high alert all the time, right? Just watching. And I had asked, as we were going into day 2, day 3 of all of this and checked into the hospital, right? It was very interesting. And I think this happens to a lot of people in the alternative space when they go into a doctor. Obviously I had done my research before. I'd looked for studies. I had, kind of had a grounding. So every resident and doctor who came in was do you have a medical background? Do you work in the medical field? And I'd always say, no, but I worked in research for 7 years and my specialty in law school was medical malpractice. Right.
Perfect. They can't wait to help you out.
They're on edge.
They're ready for it. Yeah. And, the reason I did that, and this will go to talking a little bit about what parents can do if you're ever in this situation when you interact. I was really careful whenever I would say that to pair it with a joke, right, of some kind. I'd be like, oh, I'm not licensed yet, so I'm not really dangerous, and say something like that. Or, but don't worry, I'm just here for this, or I'm just here for that. I'd make some kind of joke to them because I wasn't there trying to be a shark. right? Like it wasn't my job, and it's not my job to be like a shark or like to be a badger, right? But I do want them to know when I come in there, I have some teeth, right? Like if you step on my kid, there's going to be an issue, right? And if you step on the rights, there's going to be an issue. But if you don't, right, I also want them to know, right, I stand in my own authority because I'm not in my playground anymore. I'm on their ground, right? I'm with them. But so it's important, like that's one of the first lessons, I guess, is like you want to authoritate yourself. You want to bring some kind of authority to the table. And maybe you're not a lawyer, maybe you're not, educated in the same way, or you didn't work in research, but you do have your own authority, even if it's just being a parent, right? Like even if you're just the parent of your child, or you've researched this really a lot. And a lot of people make fun of like Dr. Google or, doing research on Google. But the real truth is, doctors Google stuff too.
Yeah.
They do it all the time, and I've watched them do it. And here's a little behind the scenes for people who don't know. But there's actually, when doctors go back there and they're researching, they're not in with you yet. They're like looking behind the scenes. Or if you're in a situation like me where it's long term and they have no idea what is happening, what they do is they use something, and sometimes there's a version of it called Up to Date, but they call it the cookbook. So it's the cookbook. And what it is it pulls a bunch of most recent studies, and it basically just tells you what the research is kind of saying right now, the generalization of what is the consensus on this thing right now. So when a doctor talks to you, most of the time what they have done is, and if it's their specialty, maybe they do really know something about it. Maybe they have read a lot of the research. Possible. Not saying that's impossible, but most of the time, what the doctor is doing is they're reading Up to Date, right? They're reading the cookbook and they're telling you what the cookbook has said about that disease or something like that. And you can get access to this cookbook also if you want it. You can. All you have to do is go to your local university, go to their webpage, their medical library page. If you talk to those librarians, they will give you all the resources. Like they love this stuff. They like, if people are interested in research, they will love you. And you can get access for this most of the time for free to be able to look at this yourself. So that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes. I know that's what's going on behind the scenes, right? I know when they talk to me, it's obvious to me they have no idea what's going on, right? Everything, in our case, everything's coming back negative. No bacteria, right? No bacteria growth. Okay, so it's not cat scratch. It's not this. It's not that. It wasn't, I was worried about MRSA. I thought maybe MRSA or staph because of the streaking, but no MRSA, no staph. And then after that, right, we're going viral. And I was wondering, mumps, like, could it be mumps? Because mumps, you get the chipmunk cheeks, and his other side did start to swell a little, but mumps came back negative also. Everything, literally like Epstein-Barr virus, everything kept coming back negative. So the doctor comes in one day and he is like, okay, we don't really know what's going on. We're a little worried this could be sepsis. Is it super likely? I don't know. But what he didn't know was my older sister passed away from sepsis in 2019, right? So this was like a big, for me emotionally, this was a really intense moment to think about, does my kid have sepsis, right? And I didn't think so. Like, I thought the chances were really low, and my intuition was telling me, no, it's something else. But at that point, right, if it's sepsis, then I'm going to throw everything that there is at it, which at this point, right, besides the antibiotics that they had him on, would be vitamin C drip, right? Big dose vitamin C. Dr. Paul Merrick has done a ton of work on this. And, I suggested that. I said, if you think it's sepsis, then let's talk about vitamin C. I want a vitamin C drip. I want him on NAC, which is for Tylenol, right? They kept wanting to give him Tylenol. I kept refusing Tylenol, right? Except when he's in extreme pain. And they would always, the nurses would always be like, why do you want to half the dose on this? And I'm like, I was like, well, do you want to deplete his glutathione? And they like look at me and be like, what is glutathione, right? Like, what is like, I knew that they didn't know what it was, right? And I was trying to explain to them, right? It can deplete your glutathione, which can cause blood-brain barrier issues, right? And they'd always be like, I've never heard of that. I don't, like, the resident was like telling me, like, I couldn't find anything on the blood-brain barrier stuff. And I was like, that's fine. Like, it's cool. It's fine if you haven't heard of it. It doesn't mean it's not a real thing. It happens. But of course, the doctor, when I suggest a vitamin C drip, right, the pushback is that's not standard of care, right? That's not standard of care. We don't usually do that. I don't know about doing that. I think the pharmacy is going to look at me sideways if I do that. I've done NAC before, but I've only done NAC in cases of Tylenol overdose, right? The reason that doctors know about NAC is because of Tylenol overdose, and they will use it for that. And he said he's not overdosing on it. And, we end up in this place like many people would with the practitioner, right? Where you're in between this rock and a hard place, right? You're in an uncomfortable situation disagreeing. And we ended up actually being able to come to like a really good middle ground for both of us. And part of that was me saying, I know it's not the standard of care, right? Like, I know this is not the standard of care, and I know you're worried about liability, right? I know that. And I'm willing to sign a waiver if you'll give this to him. I am entrusting you. But another big part of it was letting him know, like, I respect you, right? I respect what you bring to the table. I respect all the years you spent doing this. I respect the fact that you see patients every day, right? Hundreds of patients. And what's my little boy, like one more patient, right? I get it. I understand. And, but, this is really important to me. And, he wanted to talk about, well, we thought vitamin C was the thing, but then there were subsequent studies that are showing that it's not. And I politely, like, just said, that those studies were done incorrectly if you compare to the dosing schedule of the original case studies. They're done improperly by the WHO. And he actually backed off when I said that and said, he said, you're probably right. I haven't read it. That's possible. And it may be the case. I haven't looked at these studies in a long time. And so we kind of came to this impasse where he said, I will let you high dose him with vitamin C, right? I'll let you do it by mouth. I hate the word let. You'll let me do nothing. You'll let me, I will allow the pharmacy to label your vitamin C, because if you bring something into a hospital, it has to be labeled by the pharmacy, right? And that was the big issue, is I could sneakily do it. Like, I could sneakily be dosing him, but then it's like this whole issue, right? So it was a big deal for him to say, yeah, like, we'll label the vitamin C, we'll label your NAC, because I said, then I'm going to do the same thing with NAC. I'm going to high dose him. And he said, I'll let you do that. I trust you. It's cheap. And he did say, like, yeah, vitamin C is cheap, and a vitamin C drip would be cheap, and it's probably useful. It's not going to hurt him, but I just don't know how to do that here. Like, I don't know how to fight back against the pharmacy for that. Right.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. Well, the next day, so I start dosing him with that, and there's no improvement. Like, we've had him on antibiotics for a few days. We're not seeing any of the swelling go down, no changes. He's just here, right? Poor buddy. And the next day, a pharmacist comes up to my room, and she looks at me with this like face, like she's known me for like 10 years. And she's like, oh my gosh, I had to come meet you. I had to come see you. And I was like, oh, okay. Hi, how are you? And she told me, I heard about you through the grapevine. I heard about you asking for vitamin C and for NAC. Like, I heard about that. And I just had to come like meet you, because when I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, here's someone with functional thinking. Like, this is functional thinking. Like, you're so ahead of the curve on this stuff. Like, oh, this is all the new like research. And I just wish that the hospital would let me do this. And she was amazing. And she just like came and chatted with me, and it turns out she said, I don't know if I would have been able to talk to you otherwise, but I got put on your case. But I like the pharmacy has been like buzzing about you, like since you talked to them about this. And I was like, oh, thank you. Like, wow, like, thank you so much. And she basically just told me her story of how hard she tried to work to get the pharmacy and the people up top to use some of these functional methods, right, to actually look into this kind of stuff. And she was like, I presented them with data over and over again. I have shown them everything. And, they just keep saying like, well, we just can't do it that way, right? We just can't do it that way, which is evidence of what I saw when I worked in research, right? It's slow. It's hard to move. It's hard to get people to change their minds. It's hard for the people up top to take risks. And it's a tough time. But I feel like what I learned from that was like when you stick up for yourself, you never know who's on your team, right? Like you never know who's going to be helpful to you in that situation, because there are, especially now, so many nurses and doctors who probably agree with you, but they just, feel like they're in a position where they can't do anything, right? Like they can't help you, or they can only help if you ask. And so being honest and open can be really helpful to find out who's on your team, right? And in the hospital, and having these discussions can be helpful for finding who's on your team. I also had a nurse. She said, oh, do you want, he has a fever of like 100, she said, or like 99.9 or something. She's like, do you want Tylenol? And I was like, no, I don't want Tylenol. Like, I'm not going to give my kid Tylenol for that. And she turned around, she said, thank you so much. And I was like, whoa, thank you for what? She said, thank you for not giving him Tylenol, just because like some parents come in here and they'll just give the full dose to get, just because, like, at any tiny fluctuation. And she said, like, just thanks for saving your kid's liver, basically, like, for being on top of it. Yeah. So you never know. You never know who's going to be on your side. You never know who's going to be there to help you. And that was something I found out. We finally, as far as the early release, we finally got to the point where, right, nothing's coming back. We've been testing literally hundreds of tests, okay? Like literally hundreds of tests, blood panels, everything. And, we got to this point where, what could they do, right? We know it's not bacterial anymore. And if it's viral, what can the hospital do for me besides what I could do at home, right? Because what are they going to do? Maybe give him fluids, let him eat, watch him. And so I talked to the nurses and doctors about this. And I just said, I asked them the question, honestly, is there anything you can do for me that I could not do at home for my little boy at this point? And, my attending said, no, you're right. There really isn't anything that we can do for him. We're just watching him at this point. We don't know what's happening. There have been no changes. And I said, okay, well, then if that's the case, I want to take my little boy home. And I said, I'm willing to sign a waiver, right? I'm willing to sign a waiver. I'm happy to take him. And if you want to give me oral antibiotics, that's fine. Like he can finish this course, all those kinds of things. And so he said, he was like, let me think about it. Like, let us like go chat. So like they go have their little chat in the hall, and they come back like an hour later and they're like, yeah, we'll give you the early release. Like we're happy to let your little boy go home. So we end up going home. And this is like the most interesting part of the experience. At least for me, this was very interesting. We go home and he gets one night at home. He sleeps in his own bed for one night. And the next morning, everything's gone. The goose egg is gone. The streaking is gone. And he's better. And I honestly don't know what to tell you about that. Like, I am not 100% sure how that came about. I reached out to a friend who is a little woo-woo, and she was like, I'll do like biogeometry on him. I'll do this stuff, from afar. So maybe that's what it was. Maybe that's what like cured him. But yeah, he had one night at home, and I don't know, it was just reaffirming to me, home is the best healing place, right? Getting out of that stress was the best healing place and was really helpful for him. So that's our story of being there. Do you have questions
Wow.
about it?
Oh my. Okay, so first of all, so thankful that your son recovered. I know that stress as a parent of like, I want to do what's best for him, but I also want to fight so hard for what is actually going to be most beneficial to his healing and not just what the hospital protocol is. You're right. It is my worst nightmare to face conventional medicine sometimes because I do feel like, especially as someone who opts to go for a more holistic treatment, I feel like I just get scoffed at.
Mm-hmm.
Or, if you are a parent who hasn't followed the CDC vaccine schedule, I know that
Mm-hmm.
can also bring like, am I going to get in trouble? Like, like
Mm-hmm.
I know those are
Mm-hmm.
very real thoughts. And so I resonate with that. I feel for you in that. I'm so happy he's better. How did you know to even like, I'm just thinking, how did you even know that it was even an option to ask for these things? And I guess that just comes back to your background in research and you having done your own. Um, is there any insight you can give us? Like, what's your first place you go to when you see a set of symptoms and you're like, I'm going to try to find some research to back up what I'm going? Are you going to PubMed? Are you
Mm-hmm.
like, where are you
Mm-hmm.
going on the internet to find this stuff?
Yeah, and the first thing is going to be, and this is something easy everyone can do, is to reach out to their tribe, right? Reach out to your tribe, reach out to people who are close to you, reach out to family and friends, because there's likely somebody in your tribe who's dealt with something similar and they can point you in the direction. And if you say specifically, does anyone know any studies, about this, or has anyone seen it, and what was your experience? And most of the time there will be parents who will be, yeah, we went through the ringer with this. Let us send you, we'll send you where we started, right? We'll send you to that one doctor's website or to this person or whatever. And I think for most people, that's the best place to start because it's accessible to everybody, right? Not everybody knows how to search PubMed. Not everybody knows how to search for these certain things. Another thing that I use is called pre-search. It's called pre-search. You can use other search engines, DuckDuckGo, what you prefer. And search engines do work for this, right? Search engines will bring up studies for you. They're a great resource. However, the reason I talk about pre-search is I have found in my studies, and especially when I'm looking for something particular, one, it's not influenced by Google, but two, it is one of the only search engines that literally brings up exactly what you ask for, like exactly what you're putting in. It will bring it up, and it's not going to bring up a biased statement about it. It's just going to bring up whatever comes first. So your wording does matter. Like what you put in does matter. You might have to try it a couple times. So those are two really accessible things. If you're really having trouble and you want someone to guide you through how do I do research on this thing, I'm really serious about I'm sure most people have a university within 200 miles of them, right? You've got some kind of university. Within that university, if they have, especially if they have a medical department, but even if they don't, librarians are so legit. There are such things as research librarians, like that's their job. And especially if you reach out to, every university will have a page, right? Every university will have a page that is like a medical library, right? The medical library page. If you want to search for law, the law library page. Every university has this. You can search for it, right, in a search engine. Go to that page, contact those librarians, ask them for help. They will help you. They will help you find what you need. They will teach you how to use PubMed. They will teach you how to do it. You can email professors. If you don't have a tribe that you trust or people close to you that you trust, you can email professors. I feel very lucky because I've been in the field so long that a lot of this stuff I already have gathered, or I have, practitioners who are friends who will send stuff my way, right? That leads to something else. But honestly, lots of times, it ends up being just a search. So that's where I'd start with that and do what you can with that and reach out. But I think those are three accessible things people can do.
Yeah.
That's so good. I heard a few things in your story that I wanted to touch on because so many people, there's almost like there's two sides to the equation. And I feel like you really ran in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this side of I'm going to go to the hospital and I'm going to do everything I'm told without question.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of that is I'm going to reject every idea that they have and not respect them at all
Mm.
and treat these doctors like criminals that are trying to pull one over on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both of those extremes are probably not the best place to be, possibly. And there's definitely some trust we want to put in people that are doing this every day. They see hundreds and hundreds of patients on a regular basis. But then there's also some like of our own authority that we need to bring to the mix.
Mm-hmm.
These are our kids, these are our lives, these are our like bodies. And when we're making medical interventions happen and occur, having some understanding of what we're doing and making some decisions is absolutely our place. And the addressing the doctors with respect, you kind of called that out and saying, hey, I respect what you do and I'm so thankful for you and that's why I'm here, right? And here's some things that I want to talk about. I want to utilize you as a resource, not only as somebody just to do everything for me, but also as somebody that can become part of a panel that I can work with. And you utilize doctors. I actually watched my dad do this with his dad. He was a quadriplegic, and they're encountering a lot of issues with his dad, and they were in the hospital, and they're trying to figure out how to solve the problem. And you can go into a doctor's office and let them go figure out the problems for you, or you, the person that probably cares the most. Not that doctors don't care, but you're going to care more because this is what their job is. They do this every day. And you can work with them. You can use their brains, the research that they've done, the different situations they've encountered, the success that they've had, the failures they've had. And you can have those conversations and you can utilize them as almost like a team. And that's an amazing and powerful way to utilize the medical system as a resource for you, and not just I couldn't figure out at home with my, natural remedies or my, homeopathic. I had to go to the doctor and then I had to give up control. That's not the case. This is just another option in the long slew of resources at your disposal to make good things happen. And Julie, I think you did an amazing job with that. So stoked that you told that story. And I hope a lot of people are hearing this, feeling inspired to utilize those resources with them. Any other learnings that you made along the way of just what the medical system's role is and can be in our lives?
Yeah, I wanted to touch on, so before I went to law school and before while I was working in research, but when I was an undergraduate, I did, my degree was in research and communications, right? And the communications part is a big deal. And I did a lot of organizational communication stuff. And when I went to this billion-dollar tech company, it kind of to become a billion-dollar tech company, lots of times, at least this company valued being scrappy, which means solve your problems yourself, right? When you have issues, we don't have like a super real HR department, so you got to solve the issues yourself. And so when I worked there, I became the communications person, right? For some reason, it became my job to mitigate and to work through everyone's conflicts, right? Like I become like the HR person of my team and the one who teaches all the things on how do we talk to each other? How do we do this? How do we do that? And after working in research, I also worked with advocacy groups, helping them learn how to talk to big companies, right? So that they'll listen and helping them not conflict. So I had a course before going to law school called How to Talk to Anyone Without Getting Punched in the Face. And this, the course was about how do we talk about controversial topics without, people getting hurt. And I'm reviving that course right now. It will be out soon and people can take it because I think it's such a big part of this issue, right? You can have legal resources, you can have medical resources, but if you don't know how to talk to anybody, you're not going to get anywhere, right? Exactly like you said, Joey, like when people come in and they come in guns blazing, right? It's not going to get you very far. You're going to be pushed out. They're not going to want to listen to you. They're going to think that you're crazy, a number of things. So one of the biggest things I learned about this experience was, besides one, setting up your own authority, right? Like you want to look like an authority figure. When I talk to people about this, especially talking to someone who views themselves as an authority figure or an expert, right? When they come in the room, you should stand. That's just a thing you should do. It's a very practical thing. Stand up, don't sit down, because it adds when you sit down, it adds to the power structure that's already in place, that they're in charge of you, right? But when you stand, your subconscious mind starts seeing somebody as an equal to you. And so it's something that you can do to help yourself. And someone like me, I'm only 5'2", like you, it doesn't really make that big a difference if I stand up, but it does, like in someone's psychology, it does matter, right? And my husband's 6'2", so yeah, you guys know he's 6'2", so having him stand there with me. But your husband or whoever is not always going to be with you, but standing is helpful, right? Standing can be helpful. That's something like very practical. Another practical thing to do, exactly like Joey said, is you always want to make the other person feel like you respect them. And this is called rapport, right? You want to build rapport. If you have any kind of common ground with that person, bring up the common ground. Maybe you guys both watch a show and you like it. Maybe you both like the same sports team, whatever. Maybe it's just that you both have kids, whatever it is, you want to bring that common ground. You want to, if you can, not everybody is good at making jokes. We'll be honest about it, right? But everyone can make some kind of jovial comment, and everyone can give somebody a compliment. And it doesn't have to be, and that can sound, I know for some people, they're like, oh, that makes me my skin crawl because I'm not being sincere. Well, just say something that's actually sincere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's just, I respect that you went through school for so long to do this, right? Or I acknowledge your contributions as somebody who's been going to school and been searching for this, right? I respect that. So establishing mutual respect is very important. It can be done with common ground. It can be done by compliments, telling someone, thank you, being very kind in that respect. And then the other thing I'm going to say is there is a place for indignation, right? There is a place for indignation. There is a place for anger, but use it very sparingly. Use it very sparingly. There was one point in the hospital where I did lose it. There was just one time. And what happened was, it was probably like 4 a.m, and a resident came in to our room. My son is asleep, and my son had been having night terrors every night, right? So I'm like sleeping with him, like in the hospital with him, bed, trying to help him. But I had happened to like get away at this point to like sleep on the couch, right? So I could actually sleep for a little bit. And so he, was already exhausted, all these things. She comes in. She does not say a word to me. All she says is like, I need to check something. She pulls off his covers. She doesn't talk to him. She doesn't wake him up. She pulls off his covers, and then she pulls down his pants and his underwear without saying anything, and starts looking at his private parts, right? She starts, and I literally immediately, obviously, stood up, and I said, you can't do that. Don't touch my son, right? You cannot touch my son. You have to talk to me about it. And, she looked up at me, and I think she was a little taken aback by, my force when I said that, right? But again, no, I'm not a shark. I'm not a badger, but I have teeth, right? If you step on my kid, I have teeth, and that's okay, right? It's okay to bear those teeth at that time. And so she backed off, and she said, I wanted to check if his testes were swollen, right? And I said, great, then you could have told me that, and you could have had me check, or you could just ask me, because I just gave him a bath. I just gave him a bath last night, and you could have just asked me before you did that. And, she was pretty indignant about it. And she was like, fine, you check. And I'm like, great, will do, right? Because he's my son. I will check. That's a really sensitive part of his body. And of course, I've taught my kids, nobody touches you there, right? You don't let people touch there. And so when she started doing that, he had woken up and started screaming, you're not allowed to touch me there. Don't touch me there, right? So this is traumatic for him. So in situations like that, anger is okay and appropriate, and indignation is okay and appropriate. And it is appropriate to bare your teeth in that situation and to let people know, right? If you continue this action, there will be consequences, right? There will be consequences, be they legal, there'll be legal consequences for you if you continue this action. And that's okay. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you have to assert your rights. then the last thing I'd say is, you kind of like I did in this story, you can always ask to talk to their general counsel. The lawyers, you can ask to talk to patient advocates. And sometimes lawyer to lawyer is a little easier. Like I know people are afraid and they feel like they don't have funds for a lawyer. If you're in desperate need, oftentimes there are advocacy groups that will help you. There are lawyers that do free consultations, and for something like this would probably do something for free, like just a conversation or something like that. There are people that do pro bono, and there are some that it's, you don't pay anything until you win a judgment, right? So there are resources out there for people. There are also free legal hotlines you can call, but I do think it's valuable to have somebody on your legal team who you can call, who can talk to their general counsel or, to their doctor or whoever, or who can send a letter. It's valuable. And it's valuable for you to be able to say, I know this is not in the standard of care. I know what I'm asking you is not what you usually do. And because it's not what you usually do, I am willing to meet you halfway and sign a waiver, right? Like I'm willing to sign this waiver because I know what I'm asking you is outside that door, but it's something that's necessary, right? And then the other thing is, remember, you can always transfer care. You're always allowed to transfer care, right? Under EMTALA, they have to stabilize you. They have to make sure you're okay. They have to take you in, but you don't have to stay with them. You can, once you're stabilized, you can always transfer care to somebody that, will be more helpful to you. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. The last question I had that was really specific to your story was, when you were signing for the early release, did you ask the question, like, what things should I look out for? What would be a catalyst for me to have to return to care? Like, did you leave knowing if I see a spike in fever, or because those are the things that I would want reassurance of. It's like, okay, I'm going to monitor at home. I'm going to do fluids. I'm going to do all these things. Please let me know. Is there something that I'm maybe not thinking of that I should really be paying attention to? And I assume they'd be willing to give you that information because they want to see your son thrive. Right now, they're on his case. If something happens to him, they're gonna have fingers pointed back at them, right? So, how does that conversation look like when you're leaving their care, but you also want to continue as responsible as possible?
Many times they'll tell you, right? Like up front, they're going to be like, if any of, if he gets streaking again, if the streaking keeps going, if he gets a fever or whatever, come back. Lots of times they'll tell you that to you. But I think it's a great question to ask if you're feeling unsure. What should I look for? What should I do? When should I come back? And the attending and I didn't have a big conversation like that. He just trusted me. At that point, we'd built up so much trust that he was like, I know you know what to look for. You'll end up back here if you're, if it's an emergency situation, right? And I said, yeah. And I will come back. But if you are worried, there's no harm in asking, there's no harm in asking.
Yeah. It's a conversation you can at least open up, and they're not going to just like withhold that intel. They want your child or you to have success. So that's a really great confidence tool. I would need leaving their establishment and going home and being like, okay, I know at least if I'm not seeing these things, we're doing exactly what we could have done in the hospital. I love that.
So good.
What a
I have
powerful
one
story.
more thing. Sorry. I have one more thing. This is just, I wanted to bring it up because you did bring up the CDC schedule stuff, right?
Yes.
And people don't often know how to handle that.
Yeah.
And I personally think, right, you adhering to the CDC schedule is your own business. It's your kid's business. And of course, like, that's one of the questions they asked me. And
Right.
my reply is always, he has everything he needs. Right. He has everything he needs. And that's the truth. He has everything he needs. Right. Now, if there were like a procedure or whatever that it might be important for them to know, because the thing is, this is more important if your kids have gotten some vaccines and not all vaccines, because there may be a procedure or a drug that may interact with the vaccines your child had, or that may be harder on your child because your child is vaccinated. So in those cases, if there are interactions, there's not very many procedures like that. But then you might want to disclose, right? They've had some or whatever. But if your kid hasn't had any, or, it's up to your discretion to say, they have everything that they need, right? They have everything they need. And it's going to be up to you to decide whether or not this information is actually relevant to your child's care. Because sometimes it's not relevant. In my case, I knew they were going to check for mumps. They knew they were going to check for mumps. It wasn't, they knew they were going to check for these other things. It didn't really matter, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they said to me. They're like, oh, well, even if he's vaccinated, he could still get mumps. And I'm like, oh, girlfriend, I know. Like, we're here for that. So, just when you're disclosing information, they can't make you say anything. This is a court of law, but it is up to your discretion. Do they need to know something? And if they do need to know it, then you should disclose it.
That's good to know. And I think you could also ask the question, what relevance does that have to his or her case? And if they aren't giving you a good reason, you could probably say, yeah, they have everything they need, or I don't see how that is relevant right now. Because even if it's completely unrelated, you might have a practitioner who treats you a little differently if they know that you maybe lean a certain way. So I know that can happen, and not all the time. You're right. I really love the part that you said you never know who's on your side, and the fact that you had both that pharmacist and that nurse kind of show you their hand of cards and say like, hey, I see you, I hear you, and I really resonate with what you're trying to do. Is cool. You would have never known that had you not been such a strong advocate. So I know that it's easy for us to assume and always be on guard and like everyone's against us, but you're right. You never know who's on your side. That's so powerful. I'm like, we could end the show here, but like we still have so much more to get into. So we're going to kind of shift gears. And I know that we wanted to talk about a couple things, but I want to get into something we touched on last episode, which is very timely and relevant. And that has to do more with free speech. We talked about what the amendments mean, and you kind of quizzed me and Joey, and we kind of failed beautifully in front of the audience. But this Biden versus Missouri free speech situation that's going on. I know there's also something about like Meta being sued for some RFK censorship. So walk us through. I know this is such a stark turn of the episode, but walk us through some of the more relevant happenings on the legal scene as it relates to this Biden case.
Yeah, so the case that I'm going to talk about, it originally was called Missouri v. Biden or Biden v. Missouri. As cases go through the legal system, their titles change depending on who appeals. So it started out as Missouri v. Biden, and then it gets flipped as people appeal. But then the case got turned into, the name changed. So a lot of people lost track of it because the name changed to Murthy v. Missouri. Is what it turned out to be. So this case was a case kind of we talked about last time about these papers coming out because of FOIA requests showing that the FBI and other agencies, the White House, basically talking to Meta, talking to Facebook, talking to Instagram, and influencing them to censor people, right? Saying things like, take down this, as specific as take down this post, right? Make this go away. Like this is actual language that they use in these documents, the FBI, make this go away, take this down. You better, push that out of here. We don't want anyone to see her or him. So what happened in this case in the beginning, this actually came from Missouri and Louisiana. So their state attorney generals were the ones who sued, and they sued the Biden administration for coercing these tech companies, right? So that was the beginning of this. And they had several plaintiffs who talked about, that their posts were removed for speaking about misinformation. So that's where this is coming from. And what they wanted was, at first they had wanted an injunction to stop the Biden administration from talking to these Facebook and these other social media companies and telling them to censor things, right? And they had this injunction in place for a while. And then the case just came through the Supreme Court. So this is really hot off the presses. This is like June 26th. So this is only a couple months ago.
Mhm.
And the Supreme Court, the way they treated this case was they basically said that, the two states and these plaintiffs did not have standing in the court. And so they sent the case back to now the lower courts. We don't know what has happened. That's called remanding. They remanded the case. So they reversed the other two courts, the Court of Appeals and the first court, had said, yeah, this is obviously coercion. This is stopping free speech. This is chilling free speech. We're going to place this injunction here. But then the Supreme Court in a 6-3 decision said, no, we're reversing that, no injunction, and we're remanding it back to start all over again in the court system. So
is that just because they're trying to protect the president, or like what can we assume from that decision?
Yeah. So what can we assume from that decision? So there are a lot of things. There are many things. Oh geez, I don't even know where to start with this one. So in the case, right? This case. So a lot of people have been talking about, right? This is really tough for free speech.
Yeah.
That's the idea, right? This is tough for free speech because it gives the government kind of this permission. You're allowed to coerce people, right? You can coerce companies into doing your bidding, basically. Now, I'm going to adjust that just a tiny bit. Okay, we're going to give it a little bit of nuance of what the justices said, what they actually said, and why they dismissed the case. So Amy Coney Barrett, she's the newest member on the Supreme Court. She's the one who wrote this decision for the majority. And then Alito, he wrote the dissent. We'll talk about that in a second, why it's important. So Amy Coney Barrett, she's basically saying that these people, so to have standing in a court, do you guys know what standing is? Let's just start there. Do you know what standing is?
Maybe define it for those who don't know.
I don't know.
No, that's okay. That's totally okay. So standing is whether or not you have a right to bring a case to court. Okay. Whether or not you have a right. There's this idea in the legal system, especially our legal system, to try to protect us a little bit from frivolous lawsuits, that you can't just bring a case against anybody. You have to have standing. You have to have a reason to do it. Now, standing can be split, and it has 3 parts, okay? The first part, to get standing, you have to be injured. There has to be an injury in fact, okay? Which means the defendant has to have caused you some kind of injury. You can show you've been injured either by money damages or public shame or whatever it is. You've been damaged somehow. Injury in fact is number 1. Number 2 is causation. And this is really what Amy Coney Barrett is attacking, is this causation kind of prong of standing. Because causation is you have to be able to show that that the defendant caused this. So we call this but for causation, which means, like, if I put it in a sentence, it would be, but for the government coercing these platforms, I would not have been censored. Does that make sense? It's only because of them. It's only because of them that I, got censored. So that's prong 2. And then prong 3 is redressability, which is, can the court actually help you out in this case? Okay. So Amy Coney Barrett is attacking number 2, prong number 2. She is saying they cannot show that it's actually but for the government, that it's essentially the government's fault that they were censored. And how she comes to that conclusion is by saying, well, before the government started coercing Facebook, they were already taking measures and guidelines to censor people. And so the Facebook would have probably still censored these people, or Meta would have still censored these people, even if the government hadn't coerced them. So that's what she's saying, basically. Okay. And because of that, you can't show causation, and so you don't have standing. So that is correct.
Because it was already corrupt, because they already did something wrong, even if the government encouraged that corrupt behavior, it would have probably already happened, right? Or no?
That's kind of that's a little bit how she's putting it. And I do want to jump in really quickly on that and say, when it comes to public and private, we want to be a little bit careful, because there are times we'd say, right, people who are more libertarian, people who really want the government out of their lives, right, would say, I'm a private entity, therefore you can't mess with me, right? I can do what I want. So when we're talking about Facebook and we're talking about these private companies, we have to remember they are private entities, right? And if they want to have guidelines, they're allowed to have guidelines. If they want to kick people out, they can do that. But yes, you're right. This coercing from the government. And she even said that, yeah, it appears the government has been talking to Facebook for a long time, right? This has been happening for a long time. But then she goes on to say they probably would have done it anyway, therefore, right? So that's the little tweak I'm going to make there, but mostly right. Yes, mostly right.
I'm glad you reminded me of that, because it's true. Like, you could always choose to just not partake in those. Like, it's not your legal right to be on Instagram or to get your news from Instagram or Facebook. It does get hairy, however, when a lot of this isn't super disclosed, and then people are seeing this warped view of information and they don't even know that it's a warped view. It's not even like, hey, we're censoring anything that disagrees with this, so if you don't, leave the platform. Like, that part isn't disclosed, which can be a little sticky. But
it's also hard because, social media companies are the bulk of our information, right? Yeah. The bulk of our news, right? They're acting in many ways like news agencies, which you could also say are private. But, I think the real issue here is the coercion piece and companies being coerced to censor speech. And we can't say one way or another. That's the hard thing about this case. The case hasn't totally played out. We don't know everything, right, about the allegations. And so because of that, I don't know that we could say for sure that Facebook would or would not have censored those particular people anyway, right? Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't have. And so that's what I think is wrong with her argument, right? There's some issues there that we're taking. And I would say she says, they're asking for standing that's too broad. That's one of her things. Like, we can't have this big of causation. Like, that's too broad. And I would say, standing is meant to be broad for a reason, right? You don't want to kick out cases that are really important. And that's something that Justice Alito talks about in his dissent, right? He talks about this is incredibly important, right? This is one of the most important free speech cases that there is, right? In this century. And now we're creating, I'm going to quote him because it's great, that he talks about, the case should go forward, right? He said the case should go forward. The court, however, shirks that duty, and this permits a successful campaign of coercion, in this case, to stand as an attractive model for future officials who want to control what people say, hear, and think. And I'd say that that's probably pretty true, because like we talked about last time, right? The way that the law works is it's layered. It's case on top of case. So whatever somebody says before, whatever a judge says in an old case, the new judge, right, this next case that has to do with this has to rely on that judgment. So they have to rely on what other judges have said. And so this is called stare decisis. And it's a really important principle in law, because it's this idea, like, you can't be a runaway freight train. You can't just like pull law out of the air. You have to have some sources for your law. And so what the point that Justice Alito is making is, now you're making stare decisis. You are making legal doctrine that the government could take advantage of in this point, right? So that's a little bit what this case comes down to. But it is different. I will say this case is not the same case as RFK Jr.'s case.
Okay. And talk to us about that a little bit.
Right. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and several other really notable people have come together to sue Meta, and they're likely to also sue the government over censoring their speech. So this is a little bit different, and their case will continue. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with it, but it's going to continue through the court system, and it's asking a similar question with different plaintiffs. Now, why that's important when we talk about standing is sometimes, like in this case, what the court is basically saying is you're not the right plaintiff. You're not the right person to bring this case because you don't have cause. But RFK Jr. might really be able to show, well, I am the right plaintiff,
Mm-hmm.
right? I am the right plaintiff, and the outcome can be different because of that. So there's still some hope for free speech in that sense, right? Or, you know, and I do want to say one thing I do want to say, which I don't know why Amy Coney Barrett didn't even talk about this, but one of the allegations and something that they were showing, because she said, well, you know, we can't, you're saying the government coerced, but I would say it's not really coercion. That's a really broad word. I'm not sure that it's really coercive. But one of the things that the government actually said was they threatened Meta with an antitrust lawsuit for not for not taking content down, right? For not listening. They said, hey, you've got some debts, hey, you've got some issues. We could really bring this to the forefront and make it a big problem for you. So that's why I have a problem with her saying it's not coercion and calling it like strong encouragement instead. Because if there is such a thing as an implicit threat, I would say that's probably an implicit threat.
Yeah, they like blackmailing them basically, like
seems like it.
Yeah,
it appears to be that way. Okay. Yeah.
So they would be in this. What we're kind of to kind of summarize what you're saying with my brain on the line here, the government would, after this decision, is now allowed to encourage media platforms of all kinds to make censoring decisions. That would be kind of the thought.
Well,
encourage being the key word.
Encourage. Yeah, I would say what we're seeing is you cannot stop the government, because what they were asking for is called an injunction. So they were saying, government, stop talking to these companies about their content. And so I think what Amy Coney Barrett would say is that she's saying you can't stop you can't, not that the government can do that or should, but you can't stop the government from communicating with, you know, social media companies and talking about their guidelines. Yeah. That's basically what she's saying.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And the fact that RFK is now coming to, like, as himself, he himself is the victim, right? So he can say, I have a reason why I'm being affected by their censorship. So yeah. It's almost like he can rep the cause a little bit more efficiently than maybe the two states that were saying, hey, this is an issue could. So it'll be interesting. Sounds like the one is kind of being pushed back into the lower courts, and then RFK's Junior's case is being is
Tulsi Gabbard a part of that as well?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at that. She might have been, but there are several kind of high profile plaintiffs in this case.
I thought I heard her talking about something very similar. So.
Maybe she has been speaking out a lot. Wow. Okay. Thank you for that. I think that's just a really interesting conversation. And yeah, a lot of it's still unfolding, but it opens up the broader question of what is our awareness, truthfully, of what the government is able to say and do and impact in the private sector, and also what is our relationship with these big companies. And we need to honestly, it's the same thing about food. It comes down to the consumer. The responsibility is on you. So if you are on these platforms, as we are, you have to be aware. And that's why I love having you on the show, to bring this up and just almost offer it as a conversation piece, even if there is no resolution quite yet, because to be an informed consumer means even in social media, you're aware that your entire algorithm is designed for you. I'll never forget, and this is kind of a side tangent, but in the way that this is so impactful, Joey was literally watching a reel of Jocko Willink talking about like his new movie or something, Warrior Kid. And I was on my Homegrown Instagram account watching a reel. And the very next post, as I like started to swipe up, was Jocko Willink. Like my phone heard Joey's phone.
Yes.
And I don't even follow Jocko on that account. I never see his content. But just to show you, like, it's so curated. It is not chance or by happenstance it is being formulated for you. So that's fine. I actually like how my feed is currently being curated. I actually enjoyed watching the Jocko reel because I really am excited about his movie. My kids have read his books, but just again, being that informed consumer is a part of the conversation too. I think this conversation needs to happen in the court system, but also we as the intaker of that information can make decisions. So
we can
While
also
we have you here, go ahead.
I was gonna say we can also, as consumer, right? Another takeaway from this, is that we need to use our voices strongly in this, right? If we care about free speech, we need to talk about this. This needs to be a conversation piece, and it needs to be a conversation piece to people like Meta, to our social media platforms, and we use our voices that way because Joey and I talked a little bit about this before the show, right? Now, because of all the pressure, Mark Zuckerberg has come out and said, like, yeah, the FBI was telling us to do all this stuff, and I decided to do it because I was scared of the FBI, right? Like, he didn't use the word scare, but he was like, they seem like a reputable organization, and like, I'm supposed to listen to them. And I thought I had to listen to them because, they're part of the government. So that admittance, though small, right? Though small, is huge because he's obviously aware, right? People are obviously speaking out about it, And it's interesting because in the case, Amy Coney Barrett, she says, well, Facebook would have probably done this anyway, because now that the White House was dwindling in their censorship and what they were censoring about the COVID-19 pandemic, but Facebook was still doing it after the White House stopped doing it. And I thought, well, that's one way to see it. But the other way to see it is that they were scared enough, right? They had been put pressure enough that they felt like they had to continue, right? That they had to continue. So it's just something to think about, that we can make people aware, and we can make even people like Mark Zuckerberg aware. And like, he acknowledged in that video, like, yeah, probably shouldn't have done that, bro. Right? Like, probably shouldn't have, it was probably a bad idea, but we can help them because, maybe since they're not public, it's not like we can make our legislatures like force them to do something that's like what we're trying to stop here. Right. But we can, the consumer does have more power than they think, for sure.
That's good. Yeah.
I dig it. I was going to say, while we've got you here, Julie, are there any other current events, things that we wanted to discuss or talk through? Was there a water?
Yeah, that we wanted to talk about chemtrails a little bit, which we've actually never breached on the show. This is like our third section of the podcast. Again, shifting.
Hey, current events. This is not shifting. This is, hey, we're going to talk about a story that we wanted to discuss. And then while we've got Julie on the show, let's go over as many current events as we can to keep people in the loop.
I love it.
We got the crunchy legal lady on the show. Oh, let's go through them.
What a privilege.
And then we'll just schedule a follow-up in like a couple months and just keep everybody updated. So, Julie, what was the next one going to be?
Yeah, we were going to talk about the Water Act and chemtrails. So take us there.
Yeah, let's take you there. So this came to my attention during law school. And I was going to say, if you want me to come back every couple months, I am happy to give you a legal update, right? Like, I used to write the legal updates for like Del Bigtree and, the High Wire, right? That's like me when people get those emails. So I'll just give you the legal updates, right? So, so this actually came to my attention while I was in law school taking environmental law. And we were going over the Clean Water Act. And there's something, so to help you understand why this came up, we're talking about what are called non-point source pollution of water, okay? Non-point source pollution are basically pollutions that we don't have as much control over, that come when it rains, right? When it rains, when it floods, that brings more pollution into our water. Now, of course, we already know that there are things like lead in our water, runoff of pesticides, like all of that is taken into account. We already know that there are these toxins coming from our pipes. There are toxins coming from people's urine, everywhere. But non-point source is, basically it's coming down from the sky. It's rain. It's all these kinds of things. And in the Clean Water Act, at this point we're talking about it, he's talking about all the different non-point source polluters. And he said, oh yeah, and hydromodification is one of these. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. What's hydromodification? And he kind of laughed when he said it. He was like, whatever that means. And I was like, well, what do you think it means? Like, can we have this little conversation for just a minute? And he said, just like it was in the text and it was in the law, right, that this idea of like, well, we modify the clouds, right? Like we are up there modifying our clouds. And when we modify the clouds and they rain and they snow or whatever, it brings more toxins. It brings these non-point source polluted toxins onto the earth, right? That we then have to deal with when we are trying to clean up our water. And so I couldn't believe he said it. And I was like, okay, well, let's just talk about it. Like, let's look it through. And sure enough, it's there in the Clean Water Act, right? We do hydro, part of chemtrails, if we want to, define chemtrails, is kind of this idea, right, that we're putting certain chemicals into the air to create clouds or cloud cover. And that these chemtrails are made of different chemicals, plastics, other things that we're putting into the atmosphere. And the idea behind this originally, at least to my knowledge, and I'm not saying that I am an expert in chemtrailing or chemtrails, right? I am not an expert in this, but the idea is, in the beginning was, well, we have this idea that the earth is warming and we need to stop it from warming. And so we're creating these cloud covers, and we can do with plastic and these chemicals, and we can create more clouds, and then we can help the weather. And then there's a system called HARP, which actually does do this. They're the people who do the weather modification, right? As far as I know, they modify clouds, they modify these things. And so, yeah, as far as I know, we knew this as far back as the recent update to the Clean Water Act, because we added that hydromodification as a non-point source, because we do know it is raining down toxins on us. So there you go.
Well, I love this kind of angle at it, because my dad's a pilot, or he was a pilot for many years, and chemtrails are one of the things that used to really bother him. He's like, it's just the ultimate conspiracy theory. And I was like, Dad, I'm not saying like you as like the commercial Delta airline pilot are seeding clouds, but I am saying that I think it's possible that there are programs being run. And yes, there's something called a contrail or condensation trail, right? That regular airlines are leaving behind. I think people get confused whenever they see a line in the sky. Is that a chemtrail or is it not? And I'll tell you, I think I can tell the difference between when all of a sudden one day there's all these streaks in the sky, and then the next day the whole sky is covered in cloud cover that look very unnatural. They are not the clouds that I studied in like third grade weather patterns, right? Like these are some weird looking clouds. And so one of the hardest things about having this conversation is that the general public is so confused, because we see a plane in the sky and we think, is that a chemtrail? And that's not what you're saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying those commercial airlines are spraying. But if you look up terms like geoengineering or what's the term you just used?
Hydromodification.
Okay, those are probably good doorways to open up the conversation and say, if the government is acknowledging this, then I think we can safely say that this is something that is happening, because they're saying we see this on the back end. We see the pollutants caused by this practice. So how can we in turn deny that this practice is happening? Now, you and I aren't like environmental scientists, so we can't go back and forth between like, is this really harmful or is it not? But to say that it's happening, I think is enough to make the public start asking some questions.
Current events, right?
Current events.
Curious, this is, did you say it's a Clean Water Bill or Act or something?
The Clean Water Act, yeah, the CWA.
Where did this come from? When did it start? Who's leading this initiative, and what's the objective?
Yeah, so this falls under the EPA. So the EPA and all government, three-letter government agencies, they need an act of origin, okay? Something that creates them and says what they do. And then over time, if their responsibilities and duties get expanded, then other acts will create that expansion, or they should. Sometimes anyway, it can get a little hairy of them deciding to do something and whether or not Congress actually gave them power to do that. That's like a fight we have all the time. But the Clean Water Act is one of those where, I think it's like 1970, 1976 that the Clean Water Act comes out, and it's coming out as a modification, right? And adding to the Clean Air Act and the something called CERCLA and Superfund and all those things that the EPA takes care of, right? And so under this act, a lot of what it's dealing with is exactly what you would think is like, what is clean water? How much do the states have to do to clean their water? There are big problems when it comes to this and the Clean Air Act with this idea of runover, like running from one state to another, right? Because like rivers don't just run in one state, they run from states to state. And how much can another state require some other state to do stuff? Right? Like, can Ohio be like, hey, other state, don't do this, or can Kentucky tell Ohio, right? Like, hey, we're sharing some water here, like, stop. So that's a lot of the issues it's trying to deal with, and that's who's in charge of it, really, is the EPA. The Congress created this in the 1970s. And then I would say also, this is something to touch on with like the Clean Air Act. If you think about water is like flowing to the ocean, right? So it's kind of flowing, quote unquote, down, right? We can say it's flowing down. And so that's why we have a lot of these issues with southern states like Mississippi, right? They get a lot of these toxins, they get a lot of the issues. And that's part of the reason, or even like West Virginia gets a lot of the stuff, right? They've also got DuPont and all those issues there. But we can see the issues with these southern states and how many toxins they have, and that I think you could see it reflected in their children also, right? And the runover. But we have this with air too, because as you can imagine, if these particulates from cloud seeding or from other things are coming down, they're coming through the air, and they're going to get swept a certain direction. Now the wind belt, I don't know if you guys knew we had a wind belt, but we have a wind belt in the United States, and the wind belt is called the westerlies, okay? Which means that wind runs from the west to the east, right? And it usually runs in kind of this southern, west, southwest direction up to the northeast. And so the northeast has a ton of problems with their air and smog because of this issue. And that's where we look to see these kinds of issues. And so I only say that because when we're watching out for legislation, when we're watching out for people getting hit and people who listen to this, who live in those areas, it's important to know that, right? Because it's just important for your own sake, whether you believe in cloud seeding or not, whatever, to take care of your body, to, bring in some kind of air freshener, or not air freshener, cleaner, right? An air cleanser into your home, or water cleansing. And if you live in the South, to be really careful. And I'm just giving this as a general warning. I know it's off topic, but please get a filter for your water. Please, please filter your water after doing environmental law. Those are the two big things for me. Like, please filter your water and filter your air, because you just don't know what's in it.
Mm-hmm.
So
we saw this to your point with that wind belt with the Canada fires that were essentially just engulfing New York, New Jersey, and some other states in smoke, if you remember, to the point where I remember being on like video calls with people that were in these areas, and like they would point their camera out the window. It's almost like you couldn't see. I mean, it was crazy. It was pretty nuts to see that. And so it's just these fires that we get caught in this wind belt and just bring it all right downwind, right? So to Julie's point, those are very visible things that are getting carried across state lines, whereas there's a lot of things that maybe aren't as visible that are getting carried across. So
yeah.
And to back up some of what we were saying about cloud seeding too, we are seeing states like Tennessee raise their own legislation against this cloud seeding, right? There is stuff coming up and people are starting to become more aware of this. And I think RFK Jr. has had a big role in that, and bringing to the attention, right? Our environment really matters, right? These places matter. And he is from the New England area, like he lives there much of the time and stuff like that. So yeah, we can definitely see this play out. But we all, if you live there, just think about filtering things.
That's great practical advice. And I do remember the Tennessee thing coming up, and I think it's funny because you're right. These states, while their legislation is independent, we're all sharing the same general environment, and we're all impacting other people. So I think even looking at what maybe Ohio or Kentucky is saying about this, well, what are the neighboring states saying? I know we're kind of neighboring, but it's all very good food for thought. So I love that. Julie, this has been truthfully one of my favorite episodes. I love it. I love your heart. I love sharing your story. I'm really thankful for your wisdom. You have such a clear way of explaining things to people like even me and Joey who don't know the legal system like you do. And just bringing these really important topics to the public and having conversations like this on the podcast are so important, and it's why we do what we do. So thank you so much for being here. Can you let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, so I have a website called crunchylegallady.com, and I have free resources on there all about bodily autonomy, about vaccine exemptions. I'm actually about to come out with a webinar on how to write exemptions if you need that. Yeah, and some courses to help people learn how to talk to people like we had a conversation here, how to not get punched in the face when you talk to people. So you can find me at crunchylegallady.com or on Instagram at crunchy.legal.lady.
Love it. Yeah, everyone go give her a follow. And until next time, because I know we will definitely have you back on. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Julie. And with that, Julie, the Crunchy legal lady, once again, has left the chat. And man, thankful to have had her on, sharing all things. Her story in the hospital is insane, but man, I love that while we had her, also grabbed some current event stuff. But what were some of the things that stuck out for you?
Well, yeah, her whole journey in the hospital, I think, is just really helpful to hear as someone who not only could have probably told me what to do before she ever walked into that, but then telling me how she actually navigated it is helpful to then apply if and when I'm ever in that situation.
Totally.
So as a mom, and someone who also aligns with like leaning more natural, it is a scary space. And so I'm glad she touched on that. Her wisdom was just, it's going to stick with me for sure. I hope it sticks with other people too. The free speech conversation, I think, is just fascinating because, again, it's this battle of like, what you're getting into when you sign up to something, but then also like how much influential power does this world of social media really wield, and is that impacting things like elections and like government right to mandate things like vaccines? Like, it's insane how concrete its implications are, and yet in the court system you can peel it back and be like, well, they're a private company. Like, it's good for me to hear her explain what's going on, and I know that those things are very much still unresolved. So I'll be interested to see how the RFK trial or lawsuit goes. I know he, as a lawyer, he's going to have the chops to really figure that out.
Totally. Listen, friends, Julie's the real deal. We love having her on. Go give her a follow. Find her at Crunchy Legal Lady. All kinds of things. Her website, Instagram. We'll share links to that in this podcast. I'm sure we'll be tagging her on some content on our social media platforms.
Totally.
And if you like the show, give us a positive review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this. On YouTube, go find us there. If you're watching us right now, thank you for doing that. And if you're not, you're missing out because, we're really fun to look at.
I try really hard to make sure my facial expressions are not just yeah. So,
oh my gosh. Anyhow, y'all probably know the drill by now, but if in case you don't, we have all kinds of things that we've got going on around here that keep the ship moving, right? So we spend a lot of time, effort, and money to kind of build this free podcast for people to learn and better their lives and be healthy, fit. We believe food education is the key to food freedom, and that's what we're here for. That's what we believe in. We've got all kinds of things that kind of keep that moving. Well, we have a Substack. If you're not a part of that, if you've never been to it, we create exclusive content on that Substack. It is a paid membership situation. It's $8 a month. Go find our Substack at Homegrown Education. You can go to substack.com and find us on there.
Yep.
You can find our resources that we've created, both free and paid, at homegrowneducation.org. Things like real food meal plans. We've got curriculum for your kids to get in a real food game to kind of help break a generational issue that we believe exists today, wherein kids don't really learn much about how to manage their own nutrition and wellness. And it's something they have to figure out once they get older. We want that to not be the case. We want to give all kids and future generations the advantage, the upper hand, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Coloring books. We've got a real food framework coming out soon.
Mm-hmm.
This is the principles to live by, if you will, with all things nutrition and how to make amazing decisions no matter where you are. We believe it's going to really change the way that you understand wellness and pursuing nutrition in the future. So definitely check that out. We'll be announcing all kinds of stuff about this upcoming book here soon. You can also find products that we've curated for you that are awesome and beneficial to your life. Things like lard dish soap, which will make dishwashing better. It just will. Got all kinds of variations of that lard dish soap.
Mm-hmm.
You can find that at shoptheh.com. Got proofing baskets for sourdough. We've got the best coffee and tea you've ever had. Not even kidding.
Yes. When that package was delivered yesterday after having no coffee for a week, I was like, praise the Lord, this is amazing.
Almost teared up. We were on vacation, so we missed a delivery, and here we are now with our own coffee. So thankful. These are the things that we're using every day. It's essentially a storefront that we've created that are all the things that we were scouring the internet and local shops and local producers, or things that we make ourselves for ourselves, because this is the way that we want to live our life. And now we've curated onto a shop for you. Again, that's shoptheh.com. You can find all that kind of stuff on there. So much more and so much more coming. Whole stoneware collection that's headed your way. Go check that out.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to follow us on Instagram, because we're so much fun and you haven't heard enough from us, you can find me at Joey Hazelmeyer, Elizabeth at Liz Hazelmeyer, and at Homegrown_Education. And friends, until next time, that's a wrap.